Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m., Wednesday, the 20th of November, and you are watching episode 152 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Land, Liberty and Libertarian, is my guest Jim Willmott, Leeds Senate candidate for the Queensland Libertarian Party. Born in Perth, Western Australia, Jim's family moved to regional Queensland in the mid-70s and spent his early years on his family's small crops and beef cattle farm west of Gympie. Jim attended the University of Queensland, Bratton campus, where he studied applied science and agriculture, specialising in agronomy with distinction. After leaving tertiary studies, Jim started an extensive and distinguished public service career where he accumulated an extensive practical experience in protecting agriculture and the environment from the ravages of invasive species and disease. As a senior policy officer, he worked on complex whole of government policies designed to improve stewardship of all state-owned lands in Queensland. He returned to farming in 2014 and continued to provide consultancy services to private enterprise and local governments, wanting his scientific expertise and specialising in the field of biosecurity. He has been active in many community organisations, standing up to governments and commercial entities that ride roughshod over people's livelihoods and property rights. Jim was previously the chairman of Property Rights Australia and continues to serve as a current board member, while also being a senior member of the National Rational Energy Network, which assists over 130 local community organisations to respond to the reckless rollout of renewable energy projects. Jim is now running as a lead Libertarian Senate candidate for Queensland in the next federal election. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Bill. Nice to be here.
We had you on a year or so ago, basically talking as the chairman of Property Rights. But you've moved on a little bit from there and you stepped down from the role as chair to be the lead candidate for the Libertarian Party. Before we get into the discussion about what's going on with the handover of land and the attack on people's property rights and also on the public's property area, I just want to cast back in regards to your term as in the public service, because going back to my earlier days, basically when I was just a teenager, sort of had friends in the wheat belt in West Australia, and we also had a lot of research and trial farms run by the various government departments, including Commonwealth and the state government. And I remember Barry Willmott was my mate, and his father managed a big wheat operation down the southwest. And they were visited occasionally by people from these research being, and it seemed to be a good relationship. And always sort of they're basically helping the farmer in regards to getting better production and all those sort of things. And there was also, of course, a lot of interest going on come harvest seasoning, checking the grain and all that sort of thing. And there seemed to be an active, good relationship with the people on the land and the people sort of overlooking the government's oversight of agriculture. And that seems to have changed today. What was it like when you were in the thing, and how do you feel that it's operating now?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. That's right. I started with it was Department of Lands back in 1994, and we were tasked with going out and doing strategic weed control projects on a lot of different types of land, private land, public land, and worked my way through up to a senior policy position. But in all that time, over that 9 years, I was with Department of Lands, Department of Natural Resources. It was it was all about a partnership with landowners and helping them, you know, get out in front of invasive species and get them ready for exotic disease outbreaks. I remember like the public servants then it like changed over time and right up to the point like in 2000, 2001. I remember sitting down in a meeting and we had the Director General then of the Department of Natural Resources, and he said, well, the department's going to go through a transformation, and it's actually a transformation of the whole public service where we're going from a service delivery function, where that's what the department did. We had a real relationship with regional stakeholders, to more of a compliance, strategic policy and legislation function. And looking back and looking to what the public service is now, that's exactly what's happened, Bill. They've really, not everywhere, but they've burnt a lot of those relationships. And now a lot of people, there's not that relationship like with the old DPI that there used to be. A lot of state government departments focused on compliance, regulation, red tape, green tape, cultural tape. And quite frankly, people are quite scared of the overreach on their property rights. So that was one of the key reasons, apart from my mum being quite sick, that I left the public service, because I joined the public service to be a servant to the public. And in reality, I wasn't there to, I guess, do enforcement and compliance on people and take away their rights. So that was one of the key reasons I left.
I think the other thing is too, a lot of situations seems now that the public servant is basically creating a framework of regulations to sort of strengthen its position or its control over the domain that it does, without regards to the impact on the individuals or the industry that's supposed to be looking after it. It's now more of an adversarial role than it was a nation building. Let's work together, get more crops, make more imports, create wealth, improve life for everyone and the Australian economy in general. It's gone from that sort of thing to where let's tie everything up and you have to do this, and this. And not only that, you have to give us the paperwork to show us you've done it too.
Yeah, look, that compliance and regulatory function at all levels of government, all three levels of government's really gone a bit out of control, but particularly depending where you are in the state and in the country, particularly at the state level and federal level, they're trying to beef up a lot more regulation there. So, there's 106,000 public servants based in Canberra, and all 106,000 of them are involved in regulatory and compliance. So, it's pretty ridiculous. So they're not out to help people anymore. They're out to, well, what I've seen, make people's lives just paperwork, surveys, and meeting certain policy outcomes that in the end, Bill, don't actually achieve any more production gains or better outcomes for the environment, unfortunately. And you can see that on the ground.
I think the other thing is it's like most public service type areas and that, the only way to make it grow and build the pyramid, get more levels, get higher pay levels, is to grow the amount of regulation. And they seem to be great at that. It doesn't seem to stop between the actual political, the parliament side bringing up more legislation. Then on top of that, you have the public bureaucrats who implement that, creating the regulation that seems to go, again, a volume or more above that. But it sort of keeps them in a job, and I suppose it also justifies their existence if they're telling people what to do. But the other thing I've also noticed is, I think it goes back to that the Vegetation Management Act in Queensland, that amendment, and it was interesting. I think that was my first experience in regards to what was going on, but how much the bureaucrats, this is at the state level in Brisbane, have discarded the on-field expertise, in-field. Like I remember with I think it was a guy called Bill Wood. He put us in a submission into that inquiry,
Yep.
and the government did. I had heaps of towns meetings. I think it took 712 submissions, but it basically dismissed every piece of information provided in submissions from people who had 40, 20, 30, 40 years of experience in the field, had documented evidence of what was going on. They just seemed to dismiss that because not one word in that act was changed. And if you actually go and have a look at the act, and if you went back to the conservation movement, the Australian conservation movement, they were actually, half of that legislation was actually up on their website years before. And the guy, Heath, what was his name? I think his surname was Heath. He actually was in the Environment Department as the Chief of Staff to Scanlon, who was only a first-term politician.
Yep.
And she was the Minister for Environment. Like, really, you've got a person who comes in from a conservationist movement. They're absolutely focused on the environment and no human intervention sort of thing being your guiding light. So you're never going to get much of a fair case. Is that where we're still at in regards to the relationship with landowner and the government and the bureaucracy?
In many cases, yes. And you can see the quality of policy and legislation that is being rolled out by a number of government departments, and how it actually is not affecting any achievable outcome on the ground other than tying you up in red tape if it's there to achieve better environmental outcomes, if it's there to achieve better farm production outcomes. The policy development cycle in state government is broken because they don't do enough quality consultation with the actual people the policy or legislation is going to impact. It's basically done internally, or it's fed from feedback loops from a lot of groups that don't have the best interest of primary production or farmers at hand, and it is slanted towards more of and that's why a lot of it's slanted towards compliance. They think they can get better on-ground outcomes and change by using the big stick, and we know from history that just doesn't work. You're better off building a partnership and making sure people that are on the land, that are in rural and regional areas, actually have input into policy and legislation, so you get a better product. And you can see the products that has been coming out of the Labor government here for some years now. They're just pathetic, and a lot of and that comes out too in a lot of the hype around the policies, a lot of the sound bites that come out. Look, I could talk about this till the cows come home, but really there's a lot of activism in the public service. And I say that at a state government level, and I say that even at a federal government level, where their ideology is driving policy and legislation development, not facts and science-based evidence.
But I also think it's a desired outcome that they want. It's got nothing to do with how it affects the land or the productivity or anything. That's not their interest. Their interest is based on the policies that have been regulations about that. Like if you look at all the things about environmental water flow in the Murray-Darling Basin, I mean, you've got to a ridiculous situation now. They've taken more and more water out. They're up to 2,750 gigalitres in the big sway over the last 10 years or so. And then the year before last, they hit them again for another 450 gigalitres to bring it up to 32,500. And they're still not satisfied. Now, really, the implementation is based, what they're trying to achieve is to satisfy some part of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act that was brought in about 1998. And so everything hinges on that. So if you want to go back and blame a lot of people, we're getting dished up, you go back and blame the Howard government, because it's the one who signed up to all this bull dust in regards to the UN's paperwork back in probably started in the 80s. We signed up to it in about 94. And then I think it was also because I was in Telstra at the time, and basically Howard was trying to sell Telstra. And I think part of the thing was a few deals going around, got a lot of this stuff from the Biodiversity Act put into the system. And what's happened is the Commonwealth Public Service has gone nuts in regards to tying every bit of regulation up to that and say, well, everything's got to satisfy this environmental outcome. And it doesn't care about the impact on food production or anything like that. Where do you think we're going with this? And looking at your interaction with property rights and farmers and things like that, where do you think this is this going to continue to deteriorate and affect their livelihoods, their way of life, and also the sanity in some instance, dealing with the paperwork they have to do these days?
Yeah, definitely. Unless we get a government that actually stands up to international pressures and starts to push back on stuff coming from either places like the United Nations or also, I guess, pressures from like global corporates and global non-government organisations. I see Australia signs up to stuff that really goes past the Parliament of Australia and goes straight into the public service. It's not a treaty or anything like that. And next thing you know, it's landed on the desk of a public service servant in Queensland, and they roll it out to meet the goals of our United Nations or with sponsorship from a global non-government organisation, and then that is forced on landowners, that policy basically, and without any kind of feedback, without any kind of, I guess, review of its effectiveness, and really, is it going to actually achieve better outcomes? And we can see that kind of thing happen. And look what's happened to the commercial fishing industry in Queensland with the pressure that's come from the United Nations and the threat to put list the reef as endangered. Like, it's decimated that industry. And a lot of that wasn't on fact. A lot of that was on I guess, push from an organisation that sits outside the government of Australia. And we've got the state and federal governments that seem to be running scared or do everything these global institutions want to do, even at the own detriment of production and the people that live here, which I find totally disgusting, Bill.
But I find it's worse than that, really, because I've been interested in a couple of UN conventions, especially on the wet tropics and that.
Yep.
But if you read actually the text of those things, they're not that bad. And what seems to have happened is the interpretation and then the implementation of those things. The bureaucracy in our country has gone bring the type of legislation you did, or being so harsh. It didn't really require you to do that. It didn't require you to smash your industries or anything like that. See, a lot of people up here think you can't touch the wet tropics, but if you actually read the whole document and you go to the annexes of that, there's a lot of things you can do in the wet tropics or any heritage areas, provided you put in the paperwork and state a case for a modification to whatever the area you want. So it's not as though they're all that heavy-handed. It's just that seems that our public service seems to have gone a bit crazy with it, and the politicians are too, not smart enough to deal with it. They sort of just let the bureaucrats run riot rather than moderate them in any way. But moving on, what do you think's the things that are going to face landowners we've got a new government in Queensland that's going to be here for 4 years. And if we'll just stick on that sort of side of it at the moment, what things do you think we're faced with, the landowners, especially in primary production, are faced with over the next 4 years? And do you think they'll get any relief from this current government?
I hope so. I think this government, I hope, will be better than the Labor government we've had for the last 3 terms. So I do think there might be some minor tweaks to a lot of to say the Vegetation Management Act, where we know it's a one size fit all across the 12 bioregions of Queensland, when it should have separate, I guess, guidelines and regulations for each bioregion. So that would be a good start. I think that hopefully they'll see the value in regions, in giving feedback into policy and legislation and listen to people that are actually have experience in land management, land use, and feed that back into policy to get better outcomes. But time will tell, Bill. I think it'll be a big learning curve for many in the public service that have had most of their career under a Labor government that really didn't see primary production as its top priority. And really, a lot of public servants, it's going to take them time to adapt to a new regime, which hopefully Christopher's government can do and is, but only time will tell. Look, we've still got a lot of issues with reef regulations. We've got a lot of issues with the way renewables are being rolled out and the imbalance there. There's a lot of issues with how they treat regions generally, and we don't really, or haven't had a real seat at the table. It's one thing to go and hold regional cabinet meetings and put some people, MPs, in ministerial portfolios, but it's another to actually really get good engagement and good outcomes in regional areas, because what I've seen is regions have just been forgotten. It's all been centralised to the head of power in the southeast corner in Brisbane, and a lot of our infrastructure is falling by the wayside. Look at our national highway, our Bruce Highway. I know here in the South Burnett and the wider Wide Bay area, they call it the donut, because a lot of resources goes over us or to the coast, and there's nothing left in the middle, and we're crying out for some really base resources, health and education, our road infrastructure, our water, and that's the same story I'm hearing in a lot of areas in rural and regional Queensland. So let's hope Christopher's government is better, that they've really got a chance, but I think there's a big mess to clean up. But they need to do a lot more for rural and regional people.
I think they're going to have a difficult time if they keep holding on to this belief about decarbonisation, because one of the things up in the North Queensland in particular, and the Cape, has been this acquisition of private property, then locking it up. And basically what's happened is, over time, with the Vegetation Management Act and other other things in regards to making life difficult for graziers and farmers in general, it's made it less favourable for succession plans within families, because what's happened, the kids can see mum and dad sort of struggling all the time, and another layer of regulations are bombed on top of them. The kids have had opportunity to go and do schooling down at Brisbane and that, and have found jobs away from the land, so they're not that connected. And so the value of the land, as a property, is devalued because people don't see profitability in it, because they see what's happening with the current owners and the burdens that they're placed on them. So it doesn't look attractive. So the chances of selling it gets less and less over time. So a lot of these large properties come onto the market. They stay on the market for a while, and then we have the government come along and make an offer that is above market value. We've seen that in Winton and Longreach just recently, with over 200 hectares of land bought up from going concerns. And basically that land's been all tied together. The plan is to rip out every bit of infrastructure on those pieces of land, including feedlots, fences, outbuildings, all that, and they may leave the homesteads depending on the quality. But otherwise, it just becomes a big paddock where the feral animals run free and the noxious weeds grow. There's no intention to manage the land. I mean, the last thing the government seems to be doing when it acquires land or locks up land is manage it. But they do, what they're saying is, well, this is now vacant land, so it's becoming a carbon sink or something like that, and they put a value on that and give themselves a pat on the back that they're helping the environment and climate change sort of thing. So unless the new government sort of tones down that big buyouts and more and more public land being locked up in this manner.
I couldn't agree more. And that's really part of, the 30% of Australia locked up into protected areas by 2030. And I think across like Australia, I think it's another 60 million hectares that are going to be locked up. I don't know how that transitions back to the amount in Queensland. But the lack of real land stewardship by the state government in land under its direct control is pretty woeful when you look at, I guess, their performance in managing invasive species and being a good number generally, a good neighbour. I just don't think they have the resources there to manage the protective estate that they've got at the present. And just because you make something a protected area, a national park or a reserve, doesn't mean you're going to get better biodiversity outcomes, because a lot of private landowners, producers around Queensland produce better biodiversity outcomes than the state government does in managing national parks, and that you can plainly see that on a well-managed, say, beef property, for example. And the way we do organised control of invasive species, the way we do I guess land management and land care techniques is far beyond a department that hasn't got enough money to even keep their fire trails and tracks clean, let alone control the invasive species load. In a lot of cases, what the government is doing in buying this land, ripping out all the infrastructure, they're degrading it. And it's going backwards, where if it was actively managed as a grazing property, and those properties were maybe provided some kind of assistance to actually look after those biodiversity values even better, well, you'd get better outcomes. The state is just putting itself under, more and more of a load, which it hasn't got the resources to actually manage its own land. But Bill, might I say, they don't mind telling us how to manage our land,
Yeah.
you've only got to look at a few national parks, and that's anywhere in Queensland. You will find a lot of, I guess, things that impact biodiversity, where you look on a lot of private land, and you'll see a lot better, in many cases, biodiversity outcomes. And I just think that's what the state government should be focusing on. And this tie-up and we should be worried about how the Christodoulou government is going to meet these emission targets that they've signed up, the same as Labor, and what steps are going to be put in place to achieve these emission targets. Is agriculture going to be exempt? I think not. And this is a problem I have even at a federal level. Like we seem to be on this pathway of net zero by 2050, but we really haven't nutted out how we're actually going to get there. If David Christofoulou's government thinks he's like they've signed up to 75% emission reductions by 2035, how are we going to get there, David? How are we going to decarbonise?
Yeah. Well, the other thing it's a double-edged sword, because hey, you take over all this land, you lock it up, you haven't got the resources to manage it. You do probably put a few bucks into it, but you're getting no revenue from it now. At least before, it employed people, it ran productive cattle, it also assisted the local town, because these farms had to be supplied with fuel and all other sort of services of that, and so that winds back. So actually, every bit of land you tie up to a no value situation, other than claiming it as a carbon sink or some rubbish, doesn't generate a dollar for the government. So now you're emptying your coffers, but feeling virtuous. It doesn't add up. You can't. Every piece of land in Australia should deliver a dividend for the Australian people. And I don't necessarily mean it has to be monetary. I mean, there's obviously pristine areas that you've got to keep, and what they are, well, they're great attractions for people to come and have a look at. So the value is in that sort of thing. Then you get other areas where you put it in a dam and there's a lake there and things like that. It creates amenity. And there's other sort of public land that gives you a dividend. It doesn't always have to be straight monetary into the government coffers. It can be indirectly through tourism or whatever. Or even if it's crap land, it can either be used as a waste area or a bombing range at least, or something. But every bit of land of the continent should be for the Australian people, and it doesn't locking it up and getting some sort of kudos from some group overseas to pat. Oh yeah, you're a good boy. You've locked up all this carbon supposedly.
Yeah, no, that's right. And you can see like one fire through it, and there goes a lot of your carbon credits up into the atmosphere. So it's a bit ridiculous, and locking up a lot, and even like private carbon farms, carbon farming, like locking up a lot of vegetation out in those western areas where there's a lot of like around Quilpie or Charleville, like you're just locking areas up, and where there might have been, say, 14 families living down the road, there might only be one family now. And that really has an impact on the entire district. And it also has an impact on the management of, and I'll come back to it, the things that really affect biodiversity. Like, it just astounds me. Like I know you mentioned the Murray-Darling there, and they're taking buying water back off these communities, but they're not looking at one of the key environmental impacts is the proliferation of carp and the damage it's doing to water quality and the ecosystems down the entire Murray-Darling. And these things, these practical environmental, I guess, issues that we should be focusing on as a nation. Again, feral cats, 22 million pigs, like plus, but they all get brushed over for the holy grail of climate change. So look, this is my stance as a libertarian. on climate change. Look, I believe that we should adapt no matter what Australia does. We must adapt to a change in climate like we always have. Everyone, I think, in Australia wants a lighter touch on the environment, and we've got to have a better use, more sustainable use of our natural resources. We are having an impact, and we need to look at how we use those natural resources for future generations. But I don't think we're getting good environmental outcomes in smothering our land with solar and wind factories and renewables generally, locking up a lot of land and drowning people in red tape, cultural tape and green tape. I think we're getting worse environmental outcomes. We're doing the opposite to what we're supposed to be achieving.
Well, just on that sort of point, in regards to saving the water out of the Murray-Darling, they're trying to achieve this thing, it's all centered around, well, environmental flows.
Yeah.
But if you go back and look at history, not so much the Darling, but I can look at the Murray itself. The Murray has never had so much water poured through it in its whole history of thousands and thousands of years. It never used to get the water out of the snowies flowing into the Murray. It used to go to the sea, but it's all been channeled through the Snowy River scheme inland, and obviously most of it goes down through the Goulburn River partly, and there's other rivers that feed in as well, that feed in the Murray. The Murray's never had to handle that volume of water ever. Yet now they're continuing to push more and more through it, take out less, and you've got this ridiculous scheme where they're damaging the Murray more because of overbank flooding far too regularly, like almost every year, to the point where it damages the red gums and things like that. Yes, they need a flooding system, but it's usually on the natural cycle. It's only usually once in every 10 years. Well, it's getting it every year, and the red gum forests are just about done.
Yep.
You've got the Barmah choke, can't handle the volume of water anyway, but they insist on pushing more down to South Australia. Then you're taking the water out of the Darling, and you're taking it off the communities, impacting on those communities in regards to what their water allocation directly affects their agricultural production. That in turn affects the viability of a lot of the smaller communities, and so everything winds back. It's destructive. It's certainly not helpful to the Australian economy or even advancing the environment.
And that's a classic example of bad policy decision, bad governance and planning, Bill, that we're seeing in a lot of areas right across natural resource management in Australia, in a lot of areas of government. It's bad policy and governance. It's everywhere.
But the other thing is they seem to take their information just on from certain universities with a certain skewer in regards to climate change or whatever. They're definitely not taking any advice from people in the field, people who have been irrigators on the Murray-Darling for 40 or 50 years of that. There's no taking into account their experience or their information. It's just to satisfy an agenda. But now landowners are faced with another sort of thing where coming into effect is the takeover, and this is probably going to affect Libertarians are going to have a bit of a policy on this as we move forward. The sudden or the continued growth of Indigenous corporations being given more and more property, and even to the extent where public property is made into freehold land and handed over. We saw that at Tobia just recently, and apparently there's another 14,000 sites. Does the Libertarian Party have a position on how we're going to move forward for landowners in the future to deal with these things? Because it's coming to a suburb near you. At the moment, it's really into the public lands area. But the other problem that we have is a lot of the leaseholds that farmers run on right throughout Queensland is leasehold land. So technically that's public land. So we get to a position, do they move on from there to, well, all right, this is public land. Yes, it's leased out at the moment, but can they make, will there, the movement move towards making claims over those sort of things? Will the leaseholder now have a lease in the future from an Indigenous corporation rather than the state government? So where do you think Libertarians have to sort of come up with a policy, and where would they sit on something like this?
Well, on the subject of land transfers under the Aborigine Land Act, which is state legislation, we want a moratorium put out right now to stop any further transfers of Crown land, even land that was under trustees of a local government, being transferred to an Aborigine corporation without a transparent process where that values everyone's rights equally. I think all Queenslanders, regardless of what colour your skin is, would like to see a more transparent process of what this land is going to be used for, and who's got to say, like, look, on the case of Tabia, they were left out of the consultation process until the last minute. They found out by mistake. Consultation was done through the state, the department, and the local government. So there's something wrong in the legislation, which again leaves the community that's going to be impacted the most by this decision out of the decision-making process. So until that is reviewed, we would have a stance that these land transfers need to stop, and it needs to be examined, and it needs to be a lot more open and transparent process so everyone can see what's going on and who wants this land and what's going to be done with it. And like in the case of Tabia, like it's really restricted the growth of that town, where they're going to have, where they do pony club, where they have their camp drafts, where the kids go to play, to swim, fishing competitions. Now, at the moment, they are locked out. They might get access through the Aborigine Corporation, but they might have to pay for access. So that's the Aborigine Land Act. It needs work, a lot of work. But then you've got all the native title claims, which can be exclusive and non-exclusive. And as a Libertarian, the Libertarian Party, we want to see a more open and transparent process there as well, where you've got things that were getting locked out of areas such as at Burrum Heads, like the Esplanade area, or in, you've got the thing in Mount Warning. I know it's in New South Wales, the Grampians recently. What's happened down at Yamba with regards to the surf life saving, had to pay a fee to have events at the local beach. Where does it stop? I think Australians want a review of land rights generally, because the people I talk to don't think it's actually closing the gap for Indigenous people. These are kind of Aborigine corporations are like they're private businesses, and they're like a collectivist organisation. Like individual Indigenous people don't get to own individual lots in say the transfer of this land at Tabia. And really, from a property rights point of view, I want to see Indigenous people owning their own land, their own house, their own parcel land, because that's going to improve the economic conditions for Indigenous people. But when it's all under this corporation and it's all under their control, I just think you get worse outcomes. And I think that needs to be broken down and seriously looked at, Bill.
I think the other problem is too, these Indigenous corporations, there's no proper auditing of them, and and the government seems very reluctant to actually hold contributors in that, because just because there's an Aboriginal corporation doesn't mean the money is dispersed to all the Indigenous people of that group. There's obviously people in different positions get better paid or whatever. But the thing is, it's going on within the organisation, and some of these corporations are actually, I think there's one in South Australia that's actually got about $2 billion worth of assets under its control, sort of thing. And that makes you wonder why so many are not well off, sort of thing, in those sort of areas. And of course, the other thing that happens is the disparity between those ones close to build up areas, like places like Toobiya. It's still not that far from Brisbane. It's connected to a big agricultural centre through Goondiwindi and all the cotton farms and that there. But then when you move into far North Australia, where the Indigenous people are still living in those types of communities, nothing's sort of really helping them any way whatsoever. With even if they get the land, well, there's nothing that's being done on it anyway. So yes, you might own or have control over hundreds of hectares, but if it doesn't generate any income, it's not improving your lot. And the other thing that's obviously going on is a lot of these things have been in train for 10 or 15 years, and they're just sitting there, and they don't pop up until they actually pop up. Because I think there's a piece of a park in the Ringwich electorate down in Sydney, which was Abbott's old seat. Now the claims just made on that, but the history of it goes back to 2009. That's when it was first earmarked, and the government sat on it since 2009. Now it's up. So how many of these things do all the governments know about that it's just sitting there and are going to come into effect over time? I think they should be open and transparent and tell us this is everything that's on the books that we're compelled to look at, and then people can sort of work out, gee whiz, we've got a problem here or whatever.
Well, look, people are, I guess, sick of the separatist approach, and we all want better outcomes for Indigenous people and closing the gaps in practical means. However, we need unity as well, and people are a bit over the constant, to me, and I'll be straight out, like the constant welcome to countries. Our land always has, always will be. That's not the activists. That's not how to bring people together. That's how to drive them apart. And I think the average Australian who might have come from overseas, and we're all Australian citizens, we just want to see some unity in the country, and we want to see us going together as one country. And I think that, there needs to be a full review of what's out there as far as native title claims and what that means, because we're seeing it happen in a lot of different locations around Australia now. It's coming to pass where we are being locked out of land we used to be able to go on and enjoy, and now we're being locked out for whether it's cultural heritage reasons, whether it's under ownership by an Indigenous Aborigine corporation. And so where's this going to stop? Like, we're supposed to be all Australians, and these access arrangements need to be worked out, and it needs to be a lot more transparent. Look at the treaty process that's going on in Victoria. There was a news item today, and it's all behind closed doors. None of it's transparent. It's just it's all locked and behind closed doors, and the public can't see what is being discussed when it comes to land access and the ownership of water. And where is this going to stop? And I think we've reached a point in Australia where we've just got to call a spade and say we've had enough, and we need a lot more transparency in the land rights process from here on in.
Well, actually, it's interesting that there's a review of the National Water Agreement, which the last time it was reviewed or action was about 2004.
Yeah.
And I had Zara Lewin on from the National Irrigators Council a couple of weeks ago, and she gave us a bit of insight, and she sent me a document. But basically, you read the document, and it's the first two pages is about, basically detailing, all the history of the Aboriginal water usages and all this sort of thing, and making them owners and managers and that of water and things like that. So I got the feeling that this discussion is looking for just in the Murray-Darling, is looking for another 100,000, another 100 gigalitres per year water to give to Indigenous groups to control, sell, own, whatever they want to do with this water. But then but that situation is going to be amplified right across the whole country, in every state, Queensland and things like that. That starts to become a bit of a problem, basically because the law, it's Western law, and this is European type law, has never allowed individual to own water, rivers or anything like that. That was all belonged to the Crown, the king, right. Whether it was a monarch or whatever, or the government, the sovereign power. This is going away from that and surrendering sovereign rights, which comes from every person that's entrusted to the government, to some individuals, a small percentage of individuals, on the basis of supposedly they have some connection or spiritual thing or whatever to the water. This is going to create a nightmare in regards to, like any organisation like up here. We've got a couple of things in the works for the Hewitt irrigation project. If something like that is overwrapped, things like that, and saying, well, the Indigenous people own, so many gigalitres of that water, so you got to pay for them on top of whatever other costs you got. It's going to start causing a lot of problems, and then the other thing it's going to do, it's going to add another degree of uncertainty to development, and people just say, nah, it's not worth the effort. I'm packing my bags and I'm just going to go and retire somewhere, or I'll go and get a public service job.
Well, there's over 2.5 million public service jobs in the nation, so there's plenty out there, Bill. But you're right; it's got to stop, and the uncertainty, and I guess and even the Indigenous land councils are calling out a lot of these fake Aboriginals and activists, saying that their history that they're claiming is not the history that these land councils know. So there's even like a disagreement at that level, and so, and again, I've said this word transparency, and that is the key thing, that these like bureaucrats seem to be like, there is a fourth layer of government in Australia, and that's the bureaucrats and the bureaucratic process, and we seem to be locking everyday people out of that process. And that's really what's driven me to go for a senator in the federal parliament, because I see that even the Australian people are losing control of their own country, and it's landing in the laps of these bureaucrats that seem to have total control. And it's really affecting the property rights of everyone. Even if you own a house in town or in a city, these land right issues will eventually come to your door, to your local park, to your favourite fishing spot, to your favourite beach. And we might be in circumstances where we are locked out of those areas, or we will have to pay to go to those areas, which I just think is ridiculous, when we should be coming together as one country under one flag and one people.
Well, it really boils down to us getting to a situation, because we're the ones who vote the politicians in, and if we keep changing them until they work out, gee, we need to do something about the public servants that seems to be running the country, not us. We just need to keep voting people out all the time until they get the message that they're supposed to be working for us. Because what I get is the people in government don't seem to put up any resistance to a lot of these ideas. They just help facilitate them. Whereas the first thing should be of a skeptical nature and say, well, how's this going to impact on the wider Australian community? What's fair and what not fair? But they just embrace whatever the narrative is for some of these issues and just push forward for them. And it doesn't matter whether and I'm betting by May that people will say, why did we bother changing government? Because nothing's changing. Because I can't see Christopher Forley or the LNP addressing any of these issues because it's too hard, and they don't want to be seen as anti-Indigenous or something like that, because they have been a party to this as well. Down in Toobiya, right next door is Goondiwindi Shire, the mayor there is Springborg, and he's known about this, and he's still the president of the LNP, and he's still supportive of this sort of stuff anyway. So you're not going to get any change in direction from them. And the other thing that's going to happen, there's not going to be one iota of difference to the juvenile justice system. These kids are going to keep doing what they're doing because the government hasn't got the ability to stop it. And they won't face that fact. So I'm betting by about May, people just go and say, nothing's changed. How do you see the next 6 months?
Well, I guess after the afterglow honeymoon period wears off the state government, yeah, that's when you really see what they're made of, what they consist of. But I think, and you can see, will Christofouli still run with the small target strategy, softly approach, or is he going to be a leader that makes real change and doesn't keep looking over his shoulder at opinion polls? Because that's what a lot of the major parties do. And quite frankly, people are sick of it, that you get these politicians that worry about opinion polls, that try and sit both sides of the fence, and they won't take a position. And I think Australians generally are crying out for politicians who aren't afraid to state a position and show some leadership and do what's best for their constituents, not what's best for their party and what's being told by their party what they should follow. So I think there's a role for minor parties like the Libertarians and others to make these governments more accountable. And look, we're never going to hold power, but we're going to be like a spur on their back in making sure that they're a better government for the people of Australia and people of Queensland, because that needs to happen. You're right, we don't see much change between each side of the major parties, and I think there needs to be more individuals, more smaller parties to make sure we keep them more accountable. They won't like it, and they say, you're better off having total control. But no, look what they've done, Bill. We're in this mess that we are now, and it is a mess because of the major parties, because of both sides. So we need more people in there that look after the best interests of Australians, individual freedoms. And that's why I've joined and put my hand up, mate. As you know, I'm not a career politician, but I've just had enough. And I think a lot of people have. And I think a lot of people this time will be looking at the federal election and looking at change, because we've given them enough length of rope, and they keep out dishing out the same stuff, and people have just had enough.
Well, moving into the conversation to the federal election, which is really somewhere between 4 and 6 months off, 6 months at the most. Probably might have it. There was a bit of discussion that they probably don't want to have to give a budget before the election, so it could be as early as April. with this, with the Libertarians, you'll be above the line, but there's a bit of a problem. I mean, Queensland's only got to elect 6 senators in a normal half-senate election. So you've got a bit of a contest now. You've got Malcolm Roberts up there for the One Nation.
Yep.
They usually get a seat in Queensland at each turn of the Senate elections. Although if you look at the last 22 election, Pauline had just scraped in. She could have, without the supports that she gets from regional electorates, she would not get in. I mean, really, and I don't know why people in the regions vote for her, because yes, she talks the talk, but gee, she doesn't deliver anything for us. But she harvests, a lot of votes and a lot of $5 fees or whatever. Then now you've got Jared Rennick,
Yep.
who was he was put down the ticket and left the thing. So now you got yourself, Jared Rennick, and Malcolm Roberts up there. So it's going to be a pretty hard tussle to get that last seat. Do you think there will be some discussions between those individuals and parties to sort of preferencing and things like that? But I don't see a lot of people voting in the federal Senate elections doing it much below the line. It's all going to be above the line. I think only a very small portion of our population votes below the line. It's only something like about 4%, because it's like everything that's too hard. I'll just put one above the line or whatever. Like minimum I have to do, the better. So obviously there'll have to be a lot of talk, and then of course getting out on the campaign trail. What do you think the main message you're going to have from the Libertarians in regards to when you do ramp up the Senate election campaign?
Like, I respect both Malcolm Roberts and Jared Rennick. I think they're both great senators. And I think, though, when it comes down to it, we're at a critical time in the history of Australia where we need to see the wind back of the bureaucracy, red tape, because we can see the pressure, I guess, on our personal freedoms. And I think the Libertarians are a party. We're not just going to tinker around the edges. We're going to be a party, and that's been like, there's Libertarian parties overseas. Take Argentina, take ACT, who's a junior coalition party in New Zealand. Because Australia needs reform, and we can't keep getting served up on a plate what's been served up to us in the last 20 years, Bill. We need to change, and we need to make more opportunities. It's about having more choice. Like, we're never going to hold power, but it's about making the government make better decisions that are going to get better outcomes for the people of Queensland and for Australia. So, look, there's a lot of policies that I agree with, that both Malcolm Roberts and Jared Rennick put forward. However, they're still looking like, we're all about cutting the bureaucracy. We're all about minimising the duplication between state and federal government. Environment, education, health. We're about making a more efficient government that is focused, we talked about it earlier tonight, on service delivery, not compliance and enforcement, not more red tape. We're about having a government that, sure, we're about free markets, but we're about giving more choice to people that are out there in the regions about what they do in their daily lives, about their private individual rights. Because I don't know if you can feel it, Bill, but I can feel my rights, whether it's property rights free speech, how I use the internet, how I employ people. They're slipping away from us and they're being put into hands of unelected bureaucrats. So that is what we are going to push for, to give you more freedoms on the ground, to get Australia spiraling up, where we seem to be on a downward spiral, election cycle after election cycle. We need to change, and it's all about having a different choice this time. And that's where people should seriously consider the Libertarians.
I think there's also a couple of pluses. The Labor Party will be completely on the nose come the election. Cost of living, this ridiculous rollout of renewable energy, that's slowly surfacing. People are starting to realise the cost. Although the government's done its best to hide it, but that's not just the Labor. The Liberals didn't do much in the way of in regards to costing either. They had the exact same program. They signed up to net zero and all the other rot. So both of them have got problems, but I also see an opportunity there for people like Rennick, yourself, and Malcolm Roberts in regards to, I think, the subsequent election of Donald Trump and Milei in Argentina is going to start making them question where they actually sit, because the LNP and the Liberal and the federal area, Nationals and the Liberals, have got this problem that they've got a lot of people in there who are talking one message and others are acting another way, because there's a lot of people in there who are pro net zero and that, and have talked up that position. There's others, who are talking, well, we've got to have cheap electricity, natural resources, and use our natural resources and things like that. So they're going to have an internal problem in regards to their message. And I think there's an opportunity for the Libertarians and others to have a clear message that makes them stand out from the twaddle that the Liberals are going to go through over the next 6 months, trying to justify their position on net zero and things like that.
Oh, totally. Like, look, net zero is like, look, Trump's going to pull out of net zero. I think that Australia should seriously look at, we should seriously looking at pulling out of net zero ourselves. But that doesn't mean we don't care about having cleaner emissions. We shouldn't go to nuclear. We should look at a denser energy source that's we've got a plentiful natural resources to power it. So, but we don't have to close all our coal-fired power stations down in the next 10 years and think how we're doing our bit for climate change. All we're going to be doing is destroying the productivity of this country and destroying the quality of life that we've grown up with and know as Australians, because that's what we're doing under an all renewables approach. And people, I don't know where they're coming from with these self-imposed targets, the 2030, the 2035, the 2050, to think that if we don't meet those targets, that somehow we're all doom and gloom and going to be boiled to death. That is just ridiculous. We've got to look at a more sustainable future. I'm all for that, caring for the environment. However, we've got to do it in a way where it protects our national security. Look how the volatility of geopolitics now and into the future. We need to make sure that we have a strong country with a strong power source and that we're united as Australians, because there's plenty of people here that if we did run into strife, how many people would stand up? How many people would stand up and say, well, I'm going to do something? Because at the moment we seem to be fragmented as a nation. I think people are over it, Bill. Let's get back to those traditional values of community, family, common sense, and the opportunity of fair go, because under these two major parties, they have just been blown into oblivion and our values have been decimated. And I think no matter what your skin colour is, where you come from, how long you've been here, we've got to get our act together as Australia and build the country for our children that we want to see, and make sure that we grasp the opportunities that are out there, because the world will pass us by. and we don't want to be left behind. So under the two major parties, giving them free rein, it's more of the same, mate.
I think the other opportunity there is, like you're talking about, cutting bureaucracy and the duplication. It really boils down to going back to the Constitution and looking at the separation of powers
Yes.
and being an advocate on those separation of powers. So the Commonwealth doesn't need 4,000 public servants running the education system, because they don't run schools, and that actually falls under the jurisdiction of the state.
Yep.
And there's a heaps of things that have been coerced into the federal sphere and added this extra bureaucracy and cost on it, and hasn't delivered anything better, because education would have to be the greatest failure of a centralised system. I mean, I went to school when there was, West Australia had an education system completely different from Victoria, same with Queensland and that. We had our own curriculum development, and you got much better outcomes. And so we can see that this NAP plan and centralised curriculum, it's obvious it hasn't made anything better. So let's go back to the old system and sort of get rid of that whole bureaucracy there. And something like that would probably be a good start. But we've got to get back to the basics of what our Constitution is.
Oh, totally. Bureaucracy is out of control. You know, I think Australians, if there was a gold medal in the Paris Olympics for bureaucracy and complexity, Australia, we would have won multiple gold medals, Bill. We're so great at complexity and bureaucracy. But you know what? We need to get services back to people on the ground. We need to look at decentralisation, and we're big on that, and getting service delivery back out. And if government's doing stuff that a private business could do and make money and make a profit out of it, well, government, get out of the way. And government is just in every aspect of our lives, and they're crowding us out. They're big and bloated, and we're in a cost of living crisis, Bill, because of a cost of government crisis, mate. There's too many people, there's too many public servants, and I'm not just looking at big, wide open cuts. I'm like people that deliver services, regional services and service delivery functions in critical areas. Of course not. You're always going to have to need a base in government, but geez, mate, we're so bloated and inefficient. There needs to be cuts because our taxpayer money is just being wasted hand over foot, and it's getting worse.
Okay, then, look, we've gone over the hour. I'd like to thank you for your time. Basically,
No worries.
if you just want to finish up on one message of hope for Australians and especially Queenslanders, what do you think it would be?
Well, I think that we're at a critical period in Australia's history, and there's a lot riding on this this next federal election. There's going to be choice of, do you want the same that's been handed out to Australians in the last 20 years, where you've seen government take over every aspect of your life, or do you want more choice, more personal freedom, and more unity in a country? And do you want a prosperous future for your children and for your family? And really, when it comes down to it, Bill, like individuals and families, they should have more say in how they're governed, and they should have more say of what rules and regulations are applied to them. And they're just not getting that at the moment. So give Libertarians a go, get on our website. We've got a number of policies there. We've got 7 key policies for this federal election, and they're all about giving, I guess, more choice, more freedom, and more responsibility to people, instead of being responsible and letting the state run our lives, because I think people have had their fair share of government getting in the way.
Okay, Jim, we'll leave it there. If you just stay on the line for a minute, I'll just introduce next week's guest and just have a chat off air for a minute.
No worries.
And thank you for your time.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and also to our YouTube channel. My guest next week will be Dr. David Barton. Now, David has done a huge number of papers in regards to different matters. His thesis was on the effects of the 2009 Black Saturday fires and what happened to Marysville. We'll have a chat about that, but we'll also talk about how far Victoria is advanced compared to other states in regards to handover of land as public land and locking up public land. So it's a similar topic, but we get it from an area that's well at the forefront of this action. So please join us next week with Dr. David Barton. Thank you.